Hope everybody is doing well on this particular Monday afternoon. Yours truly is doing good here in Durham, North Carolina, as we like to call it, the Bull City, and all along those lines. Yesterday was actually a relatively quiet day. I went over to the Hayti Heritage Center, and of course, we've got a major event that is getting ready to come up there this weekend, where we'll be celebrating a true jazz legend that has passed on several years back, and all in that kind of space. So I know that both, I think, my mom and my dad, and who knows, maybe even my brother, who has a similar name to this jazz legend, might be appearing as well. So definitely looking forward to this event that'll be on Friday and Saturday. But this past Sunday, it was relatively quiet. We did have some folks that were there for a church group that meets there on Sundays, because it is a converted church. The Hayti Heritage Center is, and it is now a cultural arts center. But there are a couple of churches that meet on a regular basis, one that meets weekly and the other that meets twice a month. Sometimes if there's a 5-week or 5 Sunday kind of session, then they'll only be meeting 2 of the 5, but usually it's 2 out of the 4, and all in that space. So I actually think that this is a 5 Sunday month, so I won't be seeing them this coming Sunday either, but I'll see them the following Sunday in that kind of lane. But it'll be quite interesting, as it was a very quiet evening there on this past yesterday, and all along those lines. Like I said, I did some work with a event that I was part of. I was actually part of a social work conference that was going on. It was a group of social workers, and they did a virtual conference that I was part of, and helping with some of the engineering on Thursday and Friday. So definitely it was the Social Worker Wealth Conference, and definitely Eva Ford, who I was talking to earlier, is trying to figure out where to take these directions and to have more conversations, because they had some very powerful speakers, including, as he liked to joke, everybody knows him as Oprah's man, Stedman Graham was their keynote speaker, and all along those lines. So he spoke, and they also had a young lady, ironically from California, and I know we've got some other people that got ties to the West Coast as well on the show with me today. But Stacey Madison has got the Be Bold bars, as that's kind of a health bar, but she is a social worker as well, and she's also got Stacey's pita chips that apparently you can get if you go to some of our area stores, but she comes out of that lane. So she was talking about some of the lessons learned from entrepreneurship in her life, and all along that kind of way. So it was very interesting, that conversation. And then on Saturday at the Cultural Arts Center that I am part of, we had our monthly poetry slam. So they're actually competing to be on the team to then go to the regionals, called Southern Fried, as well as to the nationals, and all in that space. At least I think the nationals are back in full force. I know that definitely the regionals are back in full force, and there was definitely some very intense competition. And of course, the judges, who are the folks that are pulled from the audience, get to judge the poets and to decide who moves on to the next round. So I want to say the poet that won was a gentleman named Breeze LB, who is usually a member of the team and usually does quite well, finished a strong second. And there were some lady poets that did well also. So definitely, I think it was 7 folks competing for the top honor, and Breeze walked away with that honor. And then we also had our student arts initiative. I think that's what we're calling it, summer arts initiative or something along those lines. But it is definitely a group of kids that are learning about things that we need to teach in more about, whether that's the creative field, because they were definitely learning African drumming and African dancing. They were definitely learning creative writing. They've definitely been learning even about robotics and drones and a number of other things. And actually this coming Saturday, I won't be seeing them, because they'll be going to a field trip to, I believe it's a museum there in Raleigh, if I remember correctly. And definitely they are looking forward to that field trip. As a matter of fact, I heard one of the students going like, "Isn't this the day of the field trip?" And I was like, "No, you're stuck with class today. You get your field trip on tomorrow or next week," and all along those lines. And I know that definitely Tisha, and I'm not sure about Leonie, they are moms, so they know that sometimes the kids can get excited about field trips and love those field trips. As a matter of fact, I think Tisha told me that her son just recently came from a trip going to play in some sports activities, and we're definitely interested in learning more about that as well. So it'll be interesting to see about these kind of conversations also. So we're definitely going to bring in our amazing guests and get into some of these conversations and all along those lines. Just to let folks know really quickly that are watching and are wondering, Brother Yusef is the major jazz legend that was here. I think he was originally from the Northeast. It might have been either Baltimore or New York, but he was a figurehead here in terms of being a major proponent of our jazz community. My parents definitely had a small jazz radio station because at the time in the mid 70s, they were like, we don't hear any jazz, we don't hear any blues, we don't hear any of the other music that we love. So they decided to create their own radio station and all along those lines because they were also not hearing the minority voice either. So even though we were in rural North Carolina, they were like, hey, even though we have no background in radio, we were going to start our own station, and that lasted for roughly 12 years and all in that space. And they definitely got that entrepreneurial spirit, quite honestly, because I do know that my grandfather on mom's side was a farmer and definitely involved in the farming, and that can be very entrepreneurial. And my grandmother was actually the creator of the first African American library in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is our state capital. And she literally had knocked on the doors as well to create that kind of lane because she was like, I don't have any, our kids are not getting the books they need, so let's create our own. So sometimes we have to create our own, and it sounds like that's part of your message as well. So I was hearing your message, and I'm going like, I think she can relate to some of my family narrative also. So definitely that was something that was going on. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I have no kids of my own. I am in the early 60s. So in the early 60s, unless there's a younger woman or somebody that has kids, probably is not going to happen in this lifetime or all along those lines, but definitely not something that I regret because I do a lot of mentoring and have other friends that are in that mentoring space. And like I said, my two nephews that as of last August turned 14 and 15 because one was born in 2008, the other was born in 2009. So they're definitely enjoying everything from the Oculus sets to the sports because they are involved in both soccer and I want to say flag football as well. But they've definitely been in the sports lanes for a number of years and they love that sports lane. So, like I said, mom might be coming to see the Salute to Brother Yusef, which is a 2-day salute, including some film, some workshop, or at least a workshop, and 2 performances featuring some of our local artists like Nina Freelon, who has a national following as well as an international following, and Lois DeLoach and Gary Bartz, who is a jazz legend, and a number of others will be performing. And like I said, when we had our radio station, Brother Yusef was a regular fixture coming up there to play, to support us, to do fundraisers. So he was definitely a fixture when he was living at the station. So I think that's why both of my parents want to make it a point to try to make it to this salute to him that is being done by Duke Performances in association with one of our campus Muslim organizations as well. And of course, the Cultural Center, the Hayti Heritage Center is involved as well. So definitely, Tisha, tell us a little bit about your own background, because I do know that you are in that space of being a mom. And as you were saying earlier, you have the child that decided to go and participate in the game in California, apparently, and all of those lines.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks, Mark, for having me on with this casual conversation. Great to be here. And hi to people who are tuning in off of LinkedIn, YouTube. I know we're streaming to my audience as well. Joseph, good to see you. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a whirlwind. And so, Mark, I was mentioning I have one kiddo who is in club soccer. So I have a 15-year-old son, Caleb, but I also have an 11, almost 12-year-old daughter who also plays soccer. So this season has been quite interesting with all of the conquering and dividing and who goes where and who's supporting which kid, and just really being present and really being there at the time they need us, and so I'm learning a lot this season. I feel like every season, I know we're talking about lessons learned. Every season of my life has taught me something amazing that I can use, that I can pass on, that I can share. But I think in this season, I'll share that I'm learning more grace for myself of not trying to put too much on my plate, because it can be exhausting and you can't multitask and you can't just do everything all the time for everybody. You kind of have to choose where you want to invest your energy. And right now, soccer is our energy. So yes, I was just in California, came back yesterday, and then taking a mom-son road trip Friday, driving to Ventura with just Caleb and doing it all over again. And then the next weekend, my son is going back to California with my husband. And so it's kind of like, I get my daughter, you get the son. I get the daughter, you get the son. Like, it
Yes,
just is,
well,
it is what it is. It's just life.
it's life, and you mentioned that, and definitely that's something we talk about on this show quite often is that work-life balance. Like I said, my
Mhm.
brother's had a couple of relationships in his in terms of marriages and all along those lines. He's actually engaged, but this whole thing called the pandemic and then some health concerns got in the way on both of their parts because actually my future sister-in-law and all in because as far as I'm concerned, she's already a sister-in-law. And matter of fact, her birthday is coming up on the 24th. So actually, I believe that's tomorrow, and everything.
Tomorrow.
And his birthday is on Thursday. So they both have birthdays coming up, ironically near each other, even though they are separate astrological signs. Because he falls in the Scorpio range, and I think she falls right in the Libra range, and
Libra.
all along those
Uh-huh.
lines. But that one of the things I always joke with them about is they pretty much created like that. Brady Bunch kind of environment because, like I said, she's got two kids. One that is practically grown because I think that Effie
Mhm.
is a college. I want to say either sophomore or junior, and then they have the younger son who is a in high school, and I want to say he's either a rising junior or a rising senior, and all in that space. But he's definitely not on the college lanes. And then, like I said, my nephews are in the one in should be junior high now, and the other in high school. But it's kind of like that blended family. But we oftentimes talk on this show about work life balance. So, how have you managed to
Mhm.
do that work life balance? Because you are a successful entrepreneur. I imagine that your husband is also successful as well. So, how do you even manage that work life balance? Because I know that that's something that even in some of your own conversations with Tisha
Mhm.
Marie Enterprises, you talk about with other mothers and other people in that way. So, how do you even balance this whole life thing?
Tough love. How about we say that? So I always feel like these lessons I learn the hard way. And I'm in my 40s. I just turned 44 last month, September. So Virgo, shout out to all my Virgos. And I've always said, like, people are like, oh, you've got this balance thing down. Like, you don't seem stressed, but you seem really busy and you this. And I was like, you know what? I actually feel like my 30s, that decade, was a really good teacher because I was having my kiddos when I was in my 30s, and I had three businesses running simultaneously, and I didn't have balance. I didn't even know what balance was. And I feel like it's my kids that actually taught me what I needed to do because they said some pretty hurtful things that opened up my eyes to say, you know what is really important right now? What's really the most important thing? And I'll never forget, Mark. So my daughter was, she must have been like 2 years old, and my son was just around 5. And I just remember work, work, work. I was always working. I was working events for clients, and I almost felt like it was strapped to the desk, like I just couldn't move. And my son was like, hey, do you want to go with us? It was a Monday. My husband has off on Mondays. He's like, do you want to go to Peter Piper Pizza with us? And I was like, I'm so busy. I just can't. And he's like, well, it's Ellie's first time. And I said, I know, but I'm so busy. And I chose work over her first visit to go see her face at this pizza joint, that had the games, and the arcades, and the rides, and all this. And I just remember later that night tucking him in and him telling me, like, we weren't a family today. Like, these kids, they are really observant and they will really be brutally honest with you. And he's like, we weren't a family. You weren't there. You didn't see her. And I just remember, like, bawling, like literally going outside and just bawling outside of his room and just being like, something's got to give.
Yeah, it's
Like,
interesting you said that and everything because I'm definitely gonna bring in our other guests very shortly as well. But I remember, like I said, my parents created that radio station. And definitely is part of my own
mhm,
media background and definitely part of the reason that I even am involved in this field. Because in some ways, I feel that what Nick and Kim have done with Pod TV is very similar because they were frustrated by some of the things that they wanted to have covered, they weren't covered, whether that was a fiscal literacy, whether that was women's rights, or a number of other things. So when they were telling me that part of their narrative, I was going like, I've heard this story before, and all along those lines. But you mentioned something that I have oftentimes thought about because in my mind as a youngster, I definitely learned a lot about radio and was glad to have this experience of learning radio and things at my parents' radio station, but I also remember feeling sometimes as a kid that was almost like the third kid. And you said that you were, and like I said, I have a younger brother, 7 years younger than myself, and all
Mhm.
in that space. But you mentioned that you had three businesses, so I'm thinking that in some ways, you have people that have. There are some families that have 10, 14, or however many kids, but in some ways you might have had about five kids because you had your regular kids, but you had those businesses as well. And in some ways, those are like kids also. So I just wondering your thoughts around that. And did you get some of those comments from your own kids and even your husband? Because sometimes he might have been going like, we're spending all our time, you're spending all your time with work and we're not having enough me time or I time.
You know, you're right. I mean, I could say my husband can be a kid sometimes, the dogs can be kids sometimes. It's all of these responsibilities that we have. And you're right. Like, I think for me, the biggest lesson I learned is really about prioritizing what those important things were for me and really showing myself grace. And I learned a couple of different tactics, Mark, that other people actually just instilled in me, that I was like, I'm not in a race with other people. I'm in a race with myself. I don't have to compare myself to other people. I don't have to look at social media and go, oh, that person has already figured it out. They're further ahead. Why does it even matter? Like, I will get there when I get there. And we're not in the same race. And the reason why I say that is I've met with so many business coaches that I feel we're not similar. We're not. We don't have the same lifestyle. We don't, like, they probably don't have kids. So you kind of can't, it's not an apples to apples comparison, right? So when people are like, you need to go faster, farther, bigger, bolder, scale it. And you're like, okay, great. But if that was just me and I was just working just solo and I could have all the time in the world and I don't have any distractions, perhaps, but I'm not. I've got kids, I've got a hubby, I've got family, like I've got things going on, I've got businesses, and I need to be able to incorporate even some self-care into this scenario or I will break down, right? And so I really started learning that I don't have to get to the mountain the fastest. I need to pace myself. I need to make sure my priorities are in check. I need to make sure that my health is in check. And I need to do it at a pace that feels comfortable yet challenging, if that makes sense. Like, I want to be able to challenge myself. I never want to fall into this complacency zone, but I also need to make sure that I am doing the things that give me life and things that I really enjoy. So I really stopped being in competition with other people because I'm like, I'm going to get there. I know I'm going to get there, but I'm going to do it one day at a time instead of trying to do it just because you're there already, right? I'm not in comparison with you and I have different needs and desires. So that was one of the things that I felt like I really needed to let go, just on a personal note, of trying to be all things to all people, trying to do it better and faster and do more when I really didn't have the capacity. Because when you're like, I need a break.
Yeah.
I need a break.
You
And
definitely know that and everything. And one of the other things I was curious about, and I'm going to bring in Leona as well and everything. But one of the things I was curious about is how much do you feel you are obligated to be a role model? Because I know that that's been a conversation we've heard with Kamala Harris, we've heard with others, and I've even had some friends of mine that are in the minority lane that are of the opinion that they don't necessarily have to be role models. And I don't necessarily agree with that and all along those lines. But how much do you feel obligated to serve as a role model to your community? And I'm thinking that you're part of various communities and everything. So how important do you think it is to be a role model?
I feel it's very important. And you even said this earlier, Mark, that even though you don't have children, you're always involved in mentorship. And mentorship is super important to me. So I went to Arizona State University and I mentor a lot of their startup businesses because I feel like that's a big give back of I've been through the steps already. Let me at least teach you what I've learned. One of the biggest things is I'm making space in 2024, especially, and even in this quarter, is that I want to get involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters out here in Arizona because I know some of these kids who are in underprivileged homes and circumstances, and being a mom who has two young kids and who sees the struggles that they're dealing with. I'm like, I couldn't imagine if they didn't have the support that they needed. So that's one of the big things that I'm getting ready to do. In fact, is as going through the application process of becoming a mentor to another young girl, and I don't look at this as okay, this is just for me. I look at this is actually something for my children as well, because they're seeing me take that initiative, but they're also going to be involved in helping this girl too. And it becoming more of like the adopted sister, if you will, you know? So that's something that's important to me. And again, I have to let things go to make time and make space for that given the schedule that I'm on. But yes, mentorship, role models. I mean, you could say it too, Leonie. Everybody is watching you. Everybody, kids, adults, everybody, my kids especially. So I'm always about leading by example.
And along those same lines, Leona, if you can tell us a little bit about this Dayspring resources, because like I said, I sometimes think that there is a little bit and a lot of bit of ageism that goes on in society. One of the other things that I have was frustrated by in some certain degree and everything was my mom actually served on the board of directors for a fairly decent sized bank here in this area of North Carolina. And I remember that at a certain point, she was basically told that she had to get off the board because she had reached a certain age limit and all in that space. I want to say it was when she was near either 65 or 70. It might have been closer to 70 and all along those lines. But I know that even to this day, mom, who is now 81, is still very sharp and still very much can give a lot of resources and a lot of give back to the community and definitely
Yep.
will give people advice. And I sometimes think that we don't give enough credence to those that are aged into their experiences and all along those lines. And I know that that's part of what even your own work conversation is about, is helping navigate that maze of elderly care, because definitely that is important. One of the things I didn't say about Brother Youssef is that when he passed away, he was actually in a nursing home. And I remember having a friend of mine, lady I was dating at the time, who was a nurse, and when we went to visit Brother Youssef, we were actually to some degree appalled by the kind of conditions that he was in that
Yes.
particular one
Mhm.
of the
Yes.
greatest nursing home for him to be in, and I felt that they could have done a better job and all along those lines. And definitely there have been other cases of people that have gone to these nursing homes, and I'm going like, you're not giving them the best care or the best quality of life in that end of life space. And that's the way I felt about his care at that particular time. And I want to say that center is still open, because I want to say that sometimes I get around by mass transit, I go by that center, and I'm pretty sure that it is still around, and maybe they've improved since that was almost a decade ago that he passed and all along those lines. But what are your thoughts about how we are treating our elderly? Because I don't think that we give enough respect to our elderly.
Yeah.
I am not happy with many of the things that are happening. And it's not only when people are incapacitated, when
Right.
they need physical help, when they can't think clearly, but as people get older, and I'm the old kid on the block here, I'm 75. So I've been through a few things and I've seen a few things. And I have seen some really awful things going on in taking care of older people. And miscommunications are a big part of it. One of the things that happens a lot is someone says, I want to stay in my own home.
Mhm.
A lot of people do, but then they've got a house on 3 levels and they can't climb stairs anymore.
Right.
And they've got a front
Mhm.
steep step, a couple of steep steps. You can't put a ramp because it's too steep and it's too close to the street. What do? They become prisoners. That happened to my mother. She said to me, I never realized that saying I wanted to stay in my own home would make me a prisoner here.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's a terrible thing because nobody sits them down and they say, what do you want? And they say, well, I want it. But they're thinking, all other things being equal, everything's the same as it is now. Yes, I want to stay here, but maybe that's not the right place. Maybe that's not the best. Maybe it's not even a safe place
Mhm.
because you can't take care of going up and down stairs and you can't get from one part of the house to the other and you can't make your own food. And then it's not a friendly place to be anymore. And so people don't take that time to explain to people, what if the situation is different? It's the way it is now. Yeah.
It's
But
ironic that you
yeah.
said that and everything because I had a aunt that passed away a few years back. I've had a couple of aunts and uncles that have passed away, but when she passed away, she was fighting MS, and my mom
Mhm.
put in a lift to make
Right.
sure that she could get up and down the steps because it's not a big house that mom lives in, but it definitely needed to have her be able to get up onto the porch to then get into the room and everything. And recently, I want to say within the last week or two, she has definitely had that replaced and definitely upfitted because, as I mentioned, she's getting up in age, even though she's still very sharp, as I said earlier, and everything. But what I didn't say is that my brother is also fighting some. Well, I mentioned he's facing some health challenges. One of them is that, ironically, he was the one that would tease my aunt a bit about her MS, and he's been now
Mhm.
dealing with MS himself and
Mm.
everything, and is definitely dealing with some of the kind of cures that are out there, and is definitely in a different place than my aunt was. And aunt actually lived for a number of years with MS because I want to say she lived with it for almost, I want to say 25, 30, maybe even 35 years. So she definitely had it for a long time. And I'm definitely hopeful that my brother will even exceed that and be able to deal with it for a number of years. But I know he said that he did not necessarily want mom to replace the lift per se for him, but then mom was also like, I'm getting up in age and I might need it for myself as well if I don't decide to move closer to you, meaning my brother, as well as myself and her grandkids, my nephews, and all along those lines. So definitely, she has a living sister that's here in Durham as well. She's also got a sister that's closer to her in another town, but is fairly close to. And at some point, she'll make a decision as to whether she wants to give up the house. But for now, she is upfitting the house because the lift was getting its wear and tear and was definitely needed to be replaced and all in that space. So that was a choice that she made to do that. But like you said, a lot of people don't even think about that. And one, can they always afford it? Mom is of a means that she is able to afford it and
Yeah.
do all in that space.
Exactly.
She's also
Yeah.
got some amenities that the boys love. And I know that Tish will get a kick out of this, but she just recently closed the swimming pool because one of the things that the nephews love to go is to go to grandma's house because they know that they can jump in the swimming pool and enjoy
Mhm.
that swimming pool. So now the swimming pool has been covered, and we'll go through this again in the springtime and all along those lines. Because right now it's out of commission until we get through our version of fall and winter, which is not anything like the New York weather, some cold weather, not like
Not
y'all
the
do.
Southwest region.
No, no. We have very little. We have very little of it. We have. I was in New York. I was living in New York, and friends of ours had moved to New Mexico, and we were in the middle of a blizzard. We were talking on the phone, and my friend said, "You're gonna roll on the floor laughing. You're just gonna be out of it." I said, "What is it?" She said, "They got half an inch of snow on the road here. They just closed all the schools." Well, I got hysterical. I'm looking at the blizzard outside my window.
No,
She
I
was
could definitely
right.
No, I can definitely relate to that because one of the things that has happened to me is I went to school in the Midwest. I went to school in Milwaukee and everything. And the joke that I like to tell is that, like you just said, if there is a simple snowstorm here in North Carolina, then they will close just about everything and close it very quickly and all along those lines because they are afraid, one, of the snow, but also a lot of folks in the South don't know how to drive. So they're also very concerned, and rightfully so, about ice because ice can be very treacherous and all along those lines as well. But I remember when I first moved to Milwaukee and was going to school there, like I said, I was used to getting out of school. I remember literally going to wake up, hear the news, school is closed. So what does a kid do? Either goes out and plays or goes back to sleep. So I would go back to sleep, wake up, and then be looking around and asking my mom and dad, where's the snow? I could have sworn they said that there was snow, but the snow had come and gone and all in that space. So when I moved to Milwaukee and folks were like, there's a blizzard, and I'm thinking, we don't have school. They're like, that down coach your mom sits here, there's a reason. So they had the big walk-in closet, and they point to it and be like, throw that on, start going to class. So I'm going like, it's a blizzard. We don't go to classes in blizzard. Like, here we do.
Different place, different customs.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different customs and all
Yeah.
along those lines. One of the things I've talked about on this show before, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts around this, particularly as y'all are both in different aspects of leadership and all in that space, is we have talked a lot on the network about this whole notion of the imposter syndrome and
Mm-hmm.
feeling that we are not enough or that we don't have enough of a ability to give the kind of feedback and the kind of impact that we're doing, because I definitely think that there's a lot of impact going on. I was actually just talking to Eva Ford, the founder of that social work wealth conference, and she was talking about how she has already been impressed by the impact that they had just in that 2-day conference, because there was a number of workshops and things around not getting into these stereotypes. So a lot of times we think that if you're a teacher or a social work that you can't survive and be having the means to live a good life and all in that space. So they were kind of having a pushback against some of that conversation. But I'm just wondering, how did the two of you deal with that imposter syndrome? Because I think that both of you are very successful dealing with different issues. Tisha, you as a business coach, you, Leona, as the one in that advocacy space in the age conversation and everything. And I'm sure that there are times that people have looked at both of you ladies and gone like, this is not going anywhere. There's no way that this is going to be successful. And you had those outer critics as well as the inner critics and all in that space. So how did you deal first with the inner critics? We'll get to the outer critics later, because I'm sure that little voice in your head was going like, I cannot take this. There's no way that I'm going to be successful. There's no way I'm going to have that impact with you, Tisha, on these entrepreneurs and everything. So I'm sure that inner voice had to be nagging at you, just like I'm sure it was nagging at Leona to some degree as well. But how have y'all dealt with that?
Mm-hmm. I know, shout out to my friend Kim, because she always calls that little voice in your head the hag in the attic that just keeps talking to you and telling you that you're not good enough, you're not going to make it, you're not going to do this. So for me, it's all about surrounding myself with just positive, encouraging people, and even just positive, encouraging music. So I listened to a lot of that. I kind of went off my R&B rap music and started listening actually to more Christian music, because I felt like that was something that really spoke to me. And you're right. You get those moments where you're like, I can't possibly do this, but it's what stops you in your tracks is when you keep thinking that you can't, that you just got to say, you know what, not today. I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to do this. And I mean, so I have an event coming up on Wednesday, and I'm sure you all know that when you're hosting an event, especially here in Arizona, people like to wait till the very, very last minute. And so now I'm getting in my head of, oh my gosh, am I even going to have enough people coming? And a friend of mine had to just, again, remind me of this. He's like, it's not about the quantity of people. It's about the quality of the people that are coming. And so when you talk about impact, Mark, you could be in front of hundreds of thousands of people, or you could just be making an impact with one person. And I've learned that, like, just for me, I'm like, if I can impact one person today, I feel like I was on a roll. That to me was a big win. That was a win, because it really is more about deeper relationships as opposed to the masses in my book. So I don't do it as a numbers game, honestly, of like, well, how many more people can I impact? And I have to be bigger and be a bigger influencer. And I'm like, nope, I'm just going for the one. I'm going for the one. I have a friend, Royce, who comes to my live streams quite a bit. And so you'll like this story. He was a radio DJ here in Arizona. And he asked me this. He's like, how many people listen to your show? Or, I guess when he was on the radio, people asked, how big is your audience? And because we're all about numbers and audience and vanity metrics. And he's like, I have an audience of one. That's who I'm speaking to, is the audience of one. And that really was a great lesson learned, him telling me that too, because I'm like, you know what? I like that message. I have an audience of one, and that's what I stick to. And that gets this whole imposter syndrome out and gets the whole hag in the attic out if I have to do more and more and more. So that's what I would say.
And Leona, what about yourself? Because I'm sure that particularly in the nature of the way that society is going now, I mean, we've got two folks that are, whether you like them or dislike them, are running for president. And a lot of the big criticism about them is that they are of a certain age and that we need more younger voices. And I'm not saying that we don't need some younger voices, but I don't need to think that we have to automatically just kind of like discount people because they are in one case 80 and the other case being in their late 70s. Because I know even here on the network, a lot of folks have been going, and we saw that even with speaking of California, Nancy Pelosi, who just recently passed away, and a lot of people didn't know that she had gone past her kind of like being very much effective. And I think we even heard the same thing with Maxine out of California when she was in office, and a number of other things. So what is your pushback to that? Because I do think that we need to hear generational conversation, but I do hear
people do not come with expiration dates.
Mhm.
at least not stamped on them for a particular year, month, day. Different people are different. Just accept them. When they are effective, they are effective. They work, they are helpful, they are creative. In fact, I didn't start getting awards for my writing until I was well over 60.
Right.
It's not a question of
Mhm.
the date. You don't have to, as Trish says, you don't have to do it by a certain date.
Mhm.
You do it when you're ready, when you're mature enough, when you've developed enough. That's when you do it.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
I didn't start this until, well, I started it partly because my mother had asked me to do something about what happened to her.
Mm.
She ended up the last few years of her life in a single room because her guardian, her court appointed guardian, wouldn't allow her out of it. And no matter what I did, I tried to go to court, I tried to change things, could not change them. And she had not realized at the beginning that this could be the result. And when she realized it was the result, she wanted it never to happen to anybody else again. And I agreed with her. I thought it was terrible what was going on. And I didn't think it should continue. And so I'm fighting to see that things come out different for other people. Um, it's about passing on something better than I got.
Mhm.
It's about making things better for everybody.
That makes
And it's not even a matter of um, money or class or any of that stuff. It's about
Mhm.
people not treating other people properly.
no, I definitely
People
agree with you
not
on that.
caring, people not taking care of understanding family. And very often, what happens, as you talked about, Mark, before, in an institution or in a structured setting that's not family, is that things are structured in such a way that visitors or family members are considered outsiders and meddlers.
Mhm.
And the minute
Mhm.
that happens, there's an us and them that goes on, and it becomes a horror story. Oh, we're going to do things our way. Well, that's not the way the person ever liked it. And so maybe if you modify it a little bit, they'll like it better.
So,
Now, this is what the rules say. We're going to do the rules. It's going to be the old covenant. Everything's going to be by the law. And that's it. It's
uh,
never going to bend. It's never going to improve if it doesn't bend. I'm aware of a meeting that took place on Sunday between a group of people whose relatives are currently in some variety of uh, monitored guardianship, whether they're the guardians and the state is breathing down their
Mhm.
neck, or there's a court appointed guardian. And they did not want to show their face on a Zoom meeting with the person who was coming from the state to talk to the group. And this should not be. They should not be afraid of reprisals. If their loved one's alive, they should not be afraid of reprisals. They should not be afraid of being hassled. And I was just floored when I heard this story. People don't need to live in fear. People should not live in fear. They should support each other. And this is not the way things should be working.
I definitely
So
agree with you.
Mhm.
this is where I am. This is my ministry, my advocacy.
No, and definitely, and there's some powerful advocacy because you were speaking about that. A couple of things crossed my mind. One is a quote that a friend of mine who is actually a, I want to say multiple stroke survivor, but definitely has survived at least one
Mm.
stroke and everything. But I remember that he, oftentimes when we were talking, he has some kind of euphemisms or sayings that he says, and one of them is just what you said, which is that we all know our birthday, but none of us know our expiration date. Like I said, the only thing
Mhm.
man above knows that, and
Mhm.
like I said, he's not revealing it to us, or at least most of us, he's not giving us a clue of what it will be. Because even those that are diagnosed as terminal, they don't know when the terminal will actually uh, come to its final fruition and all in that space. So, like I said, none of us know that, and all in those kind of lines. So that is something my dear friend Ray Pascal says on a regular basis. We all know our birth date and that day that we came into the earth and everything, but none of us know the date
Mhm.
we will leave this plane and all in that space. And one of the other things that you said, Leon, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because one of the things that I'm very big on, and we heard a lot about it during the pandemic and just in life in general, is I consider myself to be somewhat not just a mentor, but also have some empathetic views and things around those thoughts. And I don't know that we are always good at being empathetic. I have another friend that went to like a care facility, like a one of those terminal care facilities. And in my mind, I think that once she went there, even though she was relatively young, I want to say she was in her 50s at the time, that she pretty much gave up after she went into those kind of facilities. Because I sometimes think that those facilities, while they can have a place, the hospices and everything, that they can sometimes give people to feel hopeless and all along those lines. And on that flip side, when she did eventually pass, I remember that her and her sister worked at a arts institution, not the one that I mentioned earlier, but another one here in this area. And they worked at that institution. And I remember the one of the directors at that time, and I think she's still involved in that particular art center, was given the sister, because there's two sisters, the one that passed and another sister that I think still works there. Matter of fact, I know she still works there, but they gave them the insurance papers at the funeral. And to me, that's the epitome of non-empathetic, because why are you trying to hand out these kind of papers or even deal with these papers at that particular moment? I understand that businesses have to deal with these kind of things, but there's a place and a time for everything, and I didn't think that was the place to be doing that kind of action.
No, there seem to be two groups of people who go into trying to take care of people in the end stages of life. One of them is genuinely helpful and caring, and the other is into power. And once you get involved with the one that's into power and you can't get away from them, you have a problem. You have a big problem. But there seems to be a large core group of people who get into this situation because they want the power. Mm-hmm. And it might be the money too, but it's big time the power. Really the power.
Yep. How important has it been for you, Tisha, to even deal with that empathetic side? Because I think that that's an important part, even in business lanes and all in that kind of space. Because I definitely think that sometimes our corporate heads aren't always the best at empathy either, and sometimes they don't even understand it from an entrepreneurship lane. So I was just wondering, because in our initial conversation and even hearing you talk about your kids, I definitely get the feeling that both of you, and I imagine even I've met to meet the man, that your husband is probably empathetic as well. But how has that notion of empathy been to you in your own life?
Empathy, yeah. I mean, just to even Leonie's point, you definitely, it's like one side or the other. Either you have empathy or you don't. And I believe I am that person that is empathetic, especially with my clients, especially with their needs and the people that I come across. Like it's that whole thing of you can always be kind to someone. And I've seen some crazy stuff in my days of people who were just been ruthless and unkind. But yeah, I think that's what we can do for everybody, is just show a little empathy and show kindness, because it's true what they say. You don't know what people are dealing with behind the scenes, right? We're on social, we see you, we think everything's peachy keen, but then you peel back the layers and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. And I was very fortunate that in September, and this was one of the things that I made space for, is I went to a church retreat, and an all women's church retreat. It was up in Lost Canyon, up in Williams, Arizona. It was beautiful. But I'm sitting here and I was like, I'm with women that I've known for years. But when you get into a space like that, it really lets everybody open up and share what really is going on behind the scenes. We are so good at telling you what you want to see. We're not so good at being very vulnerable and saying, you know what, I'm really, really struggling with this. I really am struggling with this. And so I felt like here was a space where women that, again, I've known for years, thinking everything is perfect in their eyes and in their world, they're starting to unravel a little bit, and they're starting to share what really is on their head and their heart. And it was beautiful in the sense that we could all come together and really be there for one another, and really show that compassion and really know where someone's at. So you always have room for that. So I have a client right now. He's like, I think I'm being a jerk. I'm sending you this text message because I think there's some things in this project we're working on that maybe there was some, miscommunication. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I always want to say that it's okay. You have a voice. You can share what's going on with you. I don't have to get into this confrontation of who was right and who was wrong. We just come up with a solution together and we keep moving. It does no good to point blame and point fingers at everybody when we can just take a step and be like, all right, let's talk about this. What's going on and how can I help you? And how can I provide a solution? So I always look at it that way. And I would say to the kids, there's the whole thing of, are you reactionary, right? What is your reaction? I've always heard it this way in a great lesson too, of, are you the thermostat or are you the thermometer? Mm-hmm. And I love that because I think in my younger days, even in my 30s in that hot mess stage, I was definitely the thermometer. You did something that set me off. I flipped my lid. I went all crazy. I started throwing things and slamming doors. But now I'm like, you know what? I'm going to step back. I'm going to just take that all in. I'm going to walk away for a bit, and then I'm going to come back more reserved and adult-like, and then we will have the conversation. And I'm trying to teach my kids that you don't just flip your lid and go crazy. You show compassion. You see where that person's at. You take a breath, and then you start the conversation calmly.
Makes a lot of sense. And Tisha and Leanna, along those same lines, I'd love to hear y'all thoughts about this. So, and I know it happens in the entrepreneurship lane, but I also think it sometimes happens in the activism lanes as well. How do you get past other people stealing your dreams? Because I do know that there have been a number of times that folks want you to fall into their dream, their ambition, their desire, whatever they might be doing on a business side, and it may not even be the same vision that you have. And I'm not saying that you can't support your friends and acquaintances and whatever their vision are, but I do see that some entrepreneurs and even some activists will try to get you to only go in their mode and their conversation, and they don't see that you might not even have the same vision. You can have a shared vision, but sometimes the vision isn't always shared. And like I said earlier, you can support some people in their vision, but you don't always have to feel like you are obligated to do that. And I do think that there are a number of particular entrepreneurs that feel that, you have to do my way or you have to join my team or all along those lines. So how does the get away from that? Because I've even seen that in the activism lanes as well.
Leonie, go ahead. Take it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, there are people who think the only way to take care of things is with more regulations and more laws. But the problem is we're not taking care of the laws that are even there now. And if you just add more paperwork to it, we've got thousands of pages of laws that people are not observing. And there's no morality to back them up. I mean, the basis of law is ethics and morality. Yeah. That's what is the basis for the laws that are enacted. And if you have no capacity to understand what underlies the law, then you're not going to respect it. And so we need to teach people this connection, that you don't just enact a law to enact a law. You enact a law because it has a meaning. And it's the meaning that's important, and not necessarily the individual words on the paper. It's what underlies that. It's the foundation. And you need the foundation or you can't build on it. I mean, I don't know, build your house on sand and watch,
Yeah, very much the case. What's your thoughts around that, Tisha? Because like I said, I do know people that will sometimes try to get you to, like I said, basically run their vision. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with supporting friends and their vision, but I do sometimes think that people have to give you room to have your own vision as well as your own kind of purpose in life, and not necessarily think that just because it's your vision, it's their vision as well.
So I'm very big into creating a word of the year, and my word for 2023 is alignment.
Right.
And it really goes perfectly with what you're saying, because if what you're telling me that I need to be involved in doesn't really align with where I'm at vision wise, my direction, I am going to say politely no, but no thanks. I have this goal in mind. And it's, as I was saying earlier, that I think you meet a lot of people who are like, I'm here, you should be here too.
Right.
You should be here. I remember a coach telling me, she's like, I live in Bali and I have a personal trainer, and this is what my day is like, and this is what I do for coaching, and I'm big into making more money. And I said, that's great, but we do not have the same life. I have no desire to move to Bali and hire a personal trainer on the beach. I'm sorry, it's not. I have kids, I have different priorities, I have different schedules, and so I love people who just let you be, who are just like, you know what, I see your vision and that is perfect for you, because we might have different wants, needs, desires. I know people who want to have, 500 employees working for them. That's not my vision. And I don't want that vision. I am perfectly happy being a solopreneur with my team of people that I work with boutique set of clients that I work with, and not making myself crazy working more and spending less time with the people that I want to be with. So it really boils down to, what do you want? And I always say that to clients, what do you want? Please create a life that you love first. Like, envision that, and then let's work that in. And if you only want to work 10 to 3 p.m., go for it.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. But how do you deal with, there's another word, because since we're using words today and everything in that space, that I sometimes hear people use the word quite often, but I don't know that they always live the word that they use and everything. Because in business and in activism, there's a word called integrity. And I know that even at the conference that I mentioned, and I've definitely seen it before, I sometimes get frustrated, and I don't know how you feel about this as a business coach, with the people that do almost what I consider like a bait and switch. So they will give you this wonderful presentation, this powerful presentation, and then they'll be like, and if you want to know more, then they just can send me a check for $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. And I'm going like, wait a minute. So you basically tease me with all of this information, and now you want me to pay a significant amount of money to get further information that I probably could get on Dr. Google or YouTube as well, and all along those lines. But I just wanted your thoughts around that, because I've definitely seen some of those presentations. And like I said, some of them I thought were very powerful presentations, but I felt almost insulted at the end when they gave me that hard pitch. And I've definitely seen that in the clubhouse streets, as we like to call them, and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take about that as an entrepreneur, because that sometimes frustrates me when I see that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that word up. Integrity is definitely one of my core values. And I mean, it should be everybody's core value, but I've come across people that have very little integrity, and they will step on you to get ahead. And as far as the pitch slapping, that's what I like to call it. We see it a lot. We see it a lot. I look at it again, bring it back to that word alignment, that if I'm meeting with someone who is a prospect, for instance, and I feel that we wouldn't work well together, I will be the first person to say that and say, I don't know that I can actually help you with this, but I know other people that I'm happy to put you in touch with. So always be a resource to people, but never take someone's money just because you want to, right? Because you think that that's what you need to do. Like, again, people first, not paycheck.
I agree with you on that. You brought up something, Leona, that the network has been very big about, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about that, meaning Pod TV, because there is a notion that both Kim Calhoun, who is one of the founders, she's an engineer by trade, and Nick Palveda, who is an attorney and a pension attorney to be specific, have in mind, which is that we are miseducating our youth, and that we're not teaching them a lot of things that we should be teaching them, including things like fiscal management and fiscal responsibility, but also things that they could even have as trades. Like earlier, we were talking about the nursing homes, and I know that there are a lot of folks that aren't even trained in how to do effective nursing or effective other fields, and we won't even talk about the vocational trades that aren't being taught as much as I think they should be taught. And while I did not take vocational courses when I was in high school, we definitely had that option, and kids could do that in the late 70s. And definitely have a uncle who passed away that it was his family had a plumbing company, and I saw the money that plumbers can make, and actually plumbers can make even more than some doctors and lawyers, and definitely athletes, even though those are some of the fields that we hear people always getting the high accolades about and all in that space. And I'm not knocking those that have those skill sets that can do those fields, but I sometimes think that we don't do enough educating people, including some of these new fields like AI and technology and stuff like that. So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this. Is our education system a little bit needing correcting?
Mm.
I'd like to go back to your integrity piece because
Yes,
I didn't get to talk about that, and I'd
please.
kind of like to. Um, People in the advocacy space are prone to being manipulated.
Hmm.
Um, I know that when I was unhappy with what was happening, the first offer that I got was for $500,000 to stop doing what I was doing. Then it was $1 million. Then it was $5 million. They did not know what to do with me when I told them, I don't want the money. It's not about the money.
Mm-hmm.
They had no clue. They were used to paying people off.
Hmm.
If I give you this much money, will you stop? If I give you that much money, will you? It's not about the money. I don't care how much money you offer me. I'm not taking it. But I don't know. There are a lot of people who, at some level, they're going to say yes. There are a lot of people who will. And it's those people we really need to watch out for because you don't know what they got paid to do. And this was actually a court order. And well, we'll pay you if you be quiet. Just pay you to be quiet.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because that's one of the we were talking about on the news show, and we actually didn't get to that much deep discussion about it. But I am actually, because I know some of the injustices that go on in our society, so I am a fan of the BLM movement and some of the pushback against some of the bad element within our law enforcement and all along those lines. But I was not a big fan of necessarily Sean King, the one of the founders of BLM, when he's sitting there trying to claim that he helped free a family out of Gaza and everything, and now it's coming out that maybe he was not involved in that at all. So I do sometimes think that another word and comes into integrity is opportunistic, because like I said, there are some leaders even in our civil rights movement that I felt were overly opportunistic. Definitely Al Sharpton comes to mind, and others as well, that sometimes they just go too much for the opportunistic view and aren't necessarily doing it for the actual cause and all along those lines. But I don't know. Y'all
Well,
saw
it's when you are looking for the publicity and not the fact of doing something. I mean, it's like last weekend, I got an urgent email from somebody whose brother had been taken over by somebody in a VA hospital. The family was in one state and the brother was in another state. And they were trying to get the brother back, and it looked like he'd been abused where he was. And so I put her in touch with some people who work on an emergency basis. That way I got this nice email back from her. Gee, thanks so much. Because nobody was helping her. She was going to all these people and they were, oh, maybe I can help you. No, I can't help you. And there's a person that's suffering and needs to be helped.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about getting publicity, because there's no publicity in this. It's just you go and you do it. And that's the end of it. But there are people, they're going to go and they're going to call the press and I helped this person do X, Y. I don't care. I want the person to be helped, period.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. Hey, Tisha, just along those same lines, and coming back to the media, because that's actually another show that we do as our Media Monday show and everything, but a lot of the conversations bleed into each other and all in that kind of way. But one of the things that I get frustrated by, and I'm sure you get frustrated by it as well, is you are a supporter and you run a national organization for mom entrepreneurs. And I'm thinking about how often our own media, whether it's local media or national media. I literally live here in Durham, North Carolina, which is part of our Research Triangle Park. And I think about all those great scientists that are doing great advancements in that space and everything. But we don't hear the coverage about that in the media. It's all about the latest crime, and the same in Arizona, same in New Mexico, same in California, a number of other places where folks are watching, even on the global level and everything. But it's more about that sensational coverage and not necessarily the folks that are doing some successful things that need to be highlighted in my mind. So I'm thinking that there are probably you probably could just alone in the organization that you're part of give me probably about 100 to 1,000 stories that should be covered, and we'll gladly cover them for Pride TV if you share that information with me, that are not being heard on any of our media because the media isn't covering these stories, even though there are thousands of them out there and everything. So as a leader of such an organization, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, because I'm sure that that's got to be a frustration of yours, especially as you came out of the corporate world.
You do. You hear a lot about that. And I mean, I went to Arizona State University because I wanted to be a broadcast journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to my senior year. I was like, nope, don't want to be this anymore. Still got the degree in that and really paved my own way and was on the news quite a bit, just because of the things I was doing. But I hear a lot about, like you mentioned, a lot of even local organizations, nonprofits here that are doing some great things and not getting any of the coverage, even though they keep trying. Like, for instance, my event coming up on Wednesday, the nonprofit that we're supporting, they fundraised for an entire year for a family who's battling a childhood cancer diagnosis. Like, talk about, that's selfless. That's going out there. That's raising funds. That's being able to be there for this family. And I don't know that they even get much mention, and it's part of the reason why I don't watch the news, because again, remember I said earlier, like, I try not to get negative things in my head. I'd rather just fill it with positive. But I mean, even just scrolling on Instagram, I see all the bad news coming. And it was funny, like, they just talked about Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, and people are like, is this news? Is this really news? Do we really need to hear about this? And I second that. I'm like, there's so many good things going on, but yet we want to just keep the negative. And it's sad. It's sad. And it puts us all in a downer mode, so.
Either we want to hear the negative, or we want to spend time on things that are probably trivial in a lot of people's minds and everything. Like I said, one of our other shows, and I think I referenced it earlier, that we do is Media Monday. And part of what we were discussing was this whole romance that is going on between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, and that's what everybody seems to be having on their mind, is the importance of this. And partially that's because Taylor is notorious for making songs about relationships after they go south. So now the bet is whether it will go south and whether Travis Kelce will be the subject of a song later on, and all in that kind of space, because that is kind of what she is known for. But she's also known, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as a business lady and everything, that one story that did get a lot of play, and I'm glad it got play, was the fact that she reached back and was giving money to folks that were part of her staff. Because, it's an event planner, because I know that you also have the event planning background and everything, that it takes hundreds, if not thousands of people to do these events, and particularly in her case, definitely thousands, to make a concert and to go around. So she was giving money back to her grips and to Sage Hands and to a number of other folks, and gave them some sizable raises, because she made $1 billion, so she can afford a sizable raises. But definitely that was a feel-good story that I heard and everything. So I was wondering, do you think that we should see more entrepreneurs doing that as an entrepreneur and one that coaches entrepreneurs?
You said earlier about leading by example and role models. I think that's incredible that Taylor's doing that. And I think I didn't, I heard it through hearsay, but the other thing was that, like, her dancers, like, she has insurance for all of them, rightfully so. I mean, they're getting out and they're working and they're, doing all these dance moves. I mean, they could get injured at any time. So for her to be able to support them and provide them with insurance, that's huge. I think that's a great story. And I think more people could learn from that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Hey, Leonie, coming back to the education aspect, and that's the other thing that I was bringing up and everything, because one of the other things that I've heard is that, we can dream all day long. I know I've joked about it on this show, as other shows, that even before I hit the 60s, even when I was in my 50s, I used to joke that I want to make it to 200. Now I hear that there is a futurist that says that is possible, because he's saying that if we can all make it to 2030, that we can live in immortality. And then some people have asked, well, would you really want to live that long? Because so many of your friends and family may have already perished, and all along those lines. But I don't know that we teach enough around health and even around aging in our school systems, because definitely a lot of folks are going through a lot. We saw a lot of people going through mental health crisis during the pandemic, and now we've got the war that is adding to the mental health crisis. And like I said, we even do a show on Sundays around bullying and all in that space. But do you think that our school systems are doing enough to teach about mental health, and also the fact that, when you're 10 or 15, you might think that you're going to live forever, or you might have some unrealistic goal of like making it to 200 like I do and everything. But there is that fact that our bodies do age, and that changes come with our body as we age. So I don't know that the schools are doing a great job of teaching that, but I was wondering your thoughts, or is that something that maybe we have?
I want to go back to something you were talking about before as well. There are two parts to the education thing. One of them is something that I did recently, and I must admit, full disclosure, I do not have $1 billion, but I did endow a scholarship for journalists who are interested in the Bill of Rights and civil rights. And I think there's not enough being done in that area. And I wanted to make a start there. My shock came when the person from the board who was talking to my group, I was on a board of directors of a nonprofit, and they were endowing scholarships. And they said, "Would you do that?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I don't know if we're going to have enough applicants for a graduate scholarship in someone who's interested in civil rights." I said, "What? When is that going to take place?" And he said, "Well, if we don't have an applicant for 2 years, we'll give the scholarship to somebody interested in something else." I said, "I'm going to get you an applicant. I'm sure there's an applicant out there." But I was just absolutely shocked to hear somebody say, "Well, maybe nobody's going to be interested in this subject. It would be nice if nobody needed to be interested in that subject."
Right.
That would be good, but I don't think that's true. And the other part of your question is, people are not the way they used to be, because families tend to be fragmented. You've got one person, South Carolina, somebody else in California, somebody else in Michigan. And people used to watch the aging process because they saw it. They saw uncles, cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents, sometimes great-great-grandparents. They don't see them anymore because they're very often locked away in a facility, and they don't see them. They'll see them once in 5 years, and that's it. That's not a relationship. We do have Zoom, and you should be able to use it for family communication. You should be using, if you're not, and you don't want to travel, or you can't travel, or it's too expensive to travel, Zoom is not expensive. People need to use the resources we've got, because if we don't use them, we're going to say later, "I didn't know. I didn't know that, life is finite." Well, 8-year-old kids are not going to know that. They're going to lose their grandparents when they're 15, 16, 18, and they won't be able to ask them those questions. Yeah, and so if we can get people talking to school kids about communicating inside the family, we can help to preserve the family, which I think is awfully important. And we're not doing it, and the schools are not helping.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Hey, Tisha, just out of curiosity, because one of the things that I've oftentimes heard is that there are other cultures, and the Pod TV is a global network, that are very much into that multiple generation kind of conversation and all along those lines. I think that, as Leona just said, we've gotten away from that and everything. So I was just wondering, in your own life, how much of that has been an important part of your life, and is that part of the message that you give to your entrepreneurs as well? Because I do think, like I said earlier, that even with some of the organizations that I belong to, and some that I have been associated with, or that I know personally, there has been always this conversation about wanting some youth voices, but also needing to have the respect of the elders as well. And I think that there needs to be more of a generational cross conversation also that I don't know that I hear in all of these organizations, because sometimes they want to disregard the youth voice, and sometimes they also don't want to necessarily hear the voice of those that are in the middle, which is what I consider myself, or even the elderly space and all along those lines. And I think that that is a problem in our societies. We're not hearing enough of this cross-generational conversation. But I'd love to hear your take on that, and if from a business standpoint and even your own personal life.
I am seeing a little bit of that. I don't have much insight into that, personally, but I would say that I'm seeing some organizations, like I spoke for the Arizona agriculture, or sorry, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm losing my brain here, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I remember, like, even one of their keynote speeches was, how do we get people to interact with each other across these multi-generations, right? Because it is hard. I mean, I'm seeing it even in speaking with my kids of, you ask them, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm fine. And that's it. And like things that, like, even my 15-year-old son is saying, I'm like, I need to decode that because I don't even know what that means. And so I go and I ask all of the other moms, what does this mean, in teen lingo? And it's hard. It's hard to be able to communicate across these generations, but I feel like it's very important always to be able to have those open lines of communication. So
you definitely got to have those. But the other thing that I'd love to hear both you and Leona's thoughts about is, I probably eat out way too much, and I know that's a fact, and I probably definitely order out way too much, and all along those lines. Part of that is the busy life and all in that space. But when I go out and you see entire families that are having their own social media while they're supposed to be together, and I've even seen that in the dating lanes as well, because you can see a couple that is plainly out there on a date, but they are both on their Oculus or their phone sets, and I'm going like, aren't y'all supposed to be here on a date or something, or a family outing? But it seems like there is that disconnect as well. So I just wondering, how do you, both of you, fight against that? Because I have seen it definitely, and you just kind of mentioned it, Tisha, that you're sitting there going like, wait a minute, I don't mind you communicating with your friends, but we're out here on dinner and everything, but you're on your phone. So maybe y'all have a rule in place that you can tell other folks about so they can implement that rule as well.
Mm-hmm. We do that with our children, where we're like, there's no phones at the dinner table. We actually limit their phones too. Like, you can have your phone for an hour when you get home from school, and that's it. Like, put it away. We'll take it. We'll keep it downstairs, because it's just, I mean, to go to a restaurant where you're there together, and then to see everybody breaking out their phones, because we do it too. Like, we sit there and we look at people and we're like, oh my gosh, crazy. Like, I love the time when there was no phone. I know it's good for technology and convenience, but I took my son to see Super Mario Brothers over the summer, and I love that movie for a lot of reasons. It really is very nostalgic. It brings me back to my youth. But you always get those questions from a lot of today's youth of, would you rather grow up now, or would you have rather grown up when you grew up? And I was like, oh, hands down, when I grew up. Because I didn't have this pressure. I didn't have all of these things always distracting me. Like, when I watched Super Mario Brothers, I said that was the only thing that I had in my head, was defeating that King Koopa guy. That was it. That was my only problem in the world was that. And now society, there's so much pressure for these kids. So yeah, anytime I can be like, off the phone, let's just get connected. No technology. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the jokes that I had with ironically, one of my social media accounts was hacked not that long ago and everything, but I've got some backups, so it didn't impact me overly, even though it did impact to some degree. But one of the jokes that mom has is that whether it is using one of her late sister's accounts, or whether it is using, well, actually it's the only late sister because it was before them, so her late sister's account, or whether it's using somebody else, like her aunt that lives here in Durham's account, that she will sometimes use that to find out what we're up to, or along those lines, because she never got into Facebook, she never got into social media or in that space, but she did know enough to have a way to reach out and to find out what was going on by using kind of these permissions that they gave her to look into what is going on in that space. So I just wondering, at what point, Leona, did you get into the lanes of social media, or are you still not into the social media? Maybe you're
Well,
going to
I was kind of kept out of it by a court gag order. That was the gag order that I was telling you about. I couldn't go on. I didn't go onto social media because there was a lawsuit, and anything I said would be used against me. And then there was a gag order, and I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody. The judge even took away my ability to speak to my legislators, and we tried to appeal that because that's not legal. Unfortunately, that's not legal. I got very quickly out of the habit of carrying my cell phone around with me because I realized I was being tracked. And every time I parked, something would happen to my car. There are cars that have like, how to describe it? It's like an escape entry point where if you've locked your car, there's an emergency release latch. And they knew where the latch was, and they would release the latch and go into my car and move things around to scare me or to let me know that they had been there. And I quickly learned to leave my cell phone home and not to use it. So I got cured. I am cured of the cell phone bug. I am not a victim of that cell phone bug. In fact, my cell phone's way out of this room. It's nowhere near where I am. It's nowhere near I'm talking on the phone. I have that ancient thing called a landline. I still have one of those. People laugh at me. I say, I don't want to talk to whoever's listening on my cell phone. I'll talk to the person I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I actually went to an award banquet a few months ago. And there were 40 journalists sitting at the award banquet, and every journalist was staring at their cell phone. They weren't talking to each other. They were texting on their cell phone. I was so upset. It was just a horrible thing to see. You're at a banquet. You're talking to people. No, you're talking to whoever's somewhere else.
Right.
And if they're at the banquet and they're journalists, they're supposed to be covering the banquet. So that does not sound like.
I know. This was a banquet of journalists giving journalism awards. But they're not talking to the journalists sitting next to them. They're talking to whoever's on their cell phone. I was just floored. I never saw anything. I hope I never see anything like that again. But I see the families all the time, exactly the way you say, Trish. And I see people walking on the street on their cell phone, and it's not safe.
No. Heads down, not paying attention to what's in front of them.
Mm-hmm. They don't know what's going on. They need to get out in the world. And even if they're physically out in the world, mentally, they're still stuck in their cell phone.
Speaking of that, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's something else that I've talked about on this show and other shows as well. Do you think that we are doing a job of being aware and being very much aware of our surroundings? Because one of the things that I observed during the 9/11, when that happened some 22 years ago and everything, was I remember the day of that fateful attack that I lived in downtown proper in Durham and used to visit a friend's art gallery. And as I recall it, there was not a lot of animal traffic and everything. So it was almost like the animals got a note that humans are about to be stupid, so y'all might want to go hide out and everything. And I think the opposite happened with the pandemic because we went inside, and I think the animals were like, hey, it's party time, so we can go party because the humans are stuck inside and all along those lines. But I don't know that we spend enough time, one, going outside, and two, paying attention to our environment around us. So I was wondering, this is, when I think of Arizona and New Mexico, I think about the wonderful nature that is out there. I know it's young and get quite hot there in Arizona, but it does have some good nature, and of course the Grand Canyon and a number of other things in that lane. But do you think that we pay enough attention to being aware of our space around us?
No.
Absolutely not.
No, I mean, I make it a point to get out. I'd rather be outdoors. Like if you say gym or, run around the track, especially now, October is beautiful. I'm sure for you too, Leonie, out in New Mexico.
Oh, it's gorgeous here.
Oh gosh, there's not a day where I want to be stuck inside the house. I want to be outside. Like, it's funny because we were mentioning about soccer. My husband's like, do you want to take her? I'll take her. I'm like, well, I'll take her because I can go run around the track and work out at her soccer practice because I like being outdoors. But like a good friend of mine, every single month we put a hike on our calendars, every single month so we can reconnect, get out in nature, try something new, see our surroundings. Like my husband is a native, right? He's 46. He just turned 46 on Friday. And it just floored me. It floored me that I'm like, have you been to the Grand Canyon? Like, this is when we first started dating. He's like, no. And I'm like, how is it you haven't been to the Grand Canyon? So I look at it as like, even in your own state, there's things that you probably haven't seen that you need to get out and explore. You don't have to go very far. And I feel like, if anything, COVID taught us that. Get out and explore your own neck of the woods. You don't have to travel anywhere else. Go for an hour out of your way and go see what's out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and you're right, because just near me there is Duke Gardens, and that is a botanical garden, and a lot of people will come here and visit it. But sometimes I am going by either on mass transit or in a friend's car, and I'm looking, and it's not always as full as I feel it should be, and all in that space. Because, like you said, that's literally in people's backyard, but maybe it's too much in their backyards, and they might be like, I see that all the time. So it's kind of like that notion of we don't always appreciate that it is right in our backyards. I know that a lot of times musicians will say that about their music, that they don't get the support from their hometown crowd the way that they do when they go out of state or out of country or wherever they are other than their hometown, because definitely people are like, I can see him anytime where he's free at this venue or that venue. So I definitely think that, as you were just saying, Tisha, that we've got to actually use our resources that are in our own hand, in our own reach, the reach of our hands and everything, because a lot of times we do ignore it and all in that spaces. And sometimes there are some amazing things that are going on, whether you're in Arizona, whether you're in New Mexico, whether you're in Utah. Even I've got friends that watch from Australia and other places. There are some tremendous things that they are able to see, but sometimes we are so busy, caught up in the moment of what's going on, that Russian attitude and everything. I mean, rushing around, not the ethnicity and everything. But I'm just wondering, how do you get caught out of that, both of you? Because that's another thing that I hear as people, particularly in the entrepreneurial lanes, but even the activism lane, we're always on the go and on the move, that sometimes I don't think we do enough, and we do a disservice by not letting ourselves breathe the air and everything. I would just say, because I put it on LinkedIn, I actually made it a poll. If you go back and you looked at my LinkedIn, you'll see that there was a number of polls, but I had the pleasure of seeing two things that were very much rare to see, but I was just enjoying seeing them for a minute. But I was coming back from my cultural art job, and like I said, I get around by mass transit, and at the bus stop, while I was waiting, I happened to look off to the side, and I'm like, that's a very furry animal. What is that that's coming toward me? Because it was walking toward me. And if you know anything about the South, it was a raccoon. So literally by the garbage can, it was a trash can. So I think the raccoon saw me, so they decided to go to the dumpster, which was on the other side. But a long time ago, when I was a teenager, I had a pet raccoon that was named Bandit, and all along those lines. So I definitely knew what the raccoon was. I'm like, that's unusual. And then like 2 or 3 days before that, I was literally in this apartment complex that I live in, was going to, I think, go up to the corner store, and I saw a red fox, generally just casually walking through the neighborhood like it didn't have anything better to do, and all along those lines. So that's what I meant when I said sometimes it's good to see these observation points. I just kind of like the fox looked at me, and so kept on its merry way, but it was having that bonding moment that we had in that brief moment at all of those last. I mean, you would have thought the fox lived at this apartment complex called Duke Manor, and you would have thought the fox lived here. That's how casually it was walking down the street and everything. But like, okay.
I've had tenants who were furry and tenants who were feathered. And actually, it's like nature understands when you need help. When I was under the gag order, and I basically was under house arrest because I couldn't talk to anybody, animals started coming to my backyard. The roadrunners came, the squirrels came, couple of raccoons came. I mean, I had a menagerie out back there, and we had communication, and I have fruit trees in my backyard. And occasionally one of the animals would bring a piece of fruit and put it in right at the entrance of my back entrance where I go out to the yard, right in the middle of the doorway. They would put a piece of fruit. It was like, we know you're here. We feel sorry for you. We want to help you out. And they did.
No,
They did.
I could definitely relate to that because mom, who I was just referring to, is you go past that swimming pool that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. There is like a large open field, and she has a family of deer and a family of I think they're chickens or some other animal, but yeah, turkeys. It's a family of deer and a family of turkeys. And sometimes when I'm calling mom, she'll be like, "Yeah, I just saw the family of turkey. They're out there chilling and everything," or "I haven't seen the deer in a couple of weeks or a couple of days," but they have like this, like you just said, Leona, they have this communication. They are aware that mom is there and they're checking on her, and she's
Yeah.
definitely checking on them as well. So they definitely check on each other. I don't know if y'all had seen it, but one of the things that she was sharing with me is it was apparently on social media. So some social media does have some good things and some good stories, but apparently there was a bear that's out there on social media because apparently it made itself very much at home at somebody's burger joint. So they were having an outside picnic, and you could go to the social media and you will see that the bear literally was picking up the grill and was helping himself. So he's like, "Hey, I was having a picnic, y'all having y'all's own thing," and I figured I was invited, so I'm gonna have my food as well. So literally, this bear was smart enough to lift up the lid, get the burger. So I think the only thing it didn't do was flip the burger to make sure it was well done on the other side, but it definitely.
Oh my gosh, how fun.
Yeah, when mom shared that with me, I was like, I definitely have to share this story with my global audience because I'm going like, that's just something that we need more of is this notion of that. One of the things I know we talked about the elderly, but something I used to be part of a group called the Funky Eye Puppets, IPC, who used to work with George Lucas, created that, and it's still in uh, some incarnation or another, but it was a voice acting troupe. And one of the things that he talked about was this notion of childlike wonder and everything. So I
Mhm.
was wondering, how do you maintain the childlike wonder? Because that's the other thing that I think the only opposite side that we get away from is that we oftentimes do not do enough to exercise our childlike wonder. And he would have to get us out of our heads. Because, as we get to adulting, whether you're adulting at 20 or as you were saying earlier, Tisha, at 30, you were launching some of these businesses and everything, then we start not wanting to do as much of the childlike wonder and everything. So as a parent, I know that you have to get back to some of the childlike wonder, but I'm thinking both you and Leona have to do some things that are, some people may think it as childish or something that is enjoyable. So how do you maintain that freshness of thought that you had as a child? I'll start with you. Leona. How do
Mhm.
you do that in there in New Albert in the New Mexico area?
Okay, well, I start my day. I like to watch the sunrise over the Sandia Mountains. And I sit there and I watch it, and it's beautiful. It's the most stunning thing you can imagine, with the gold and the pink and the blue clouds over the mountain. It is beautiful.
Mhm.
And as you watch it, you can feel yourself open to the wonder of it. And it's mysterious, it's magical, it's a religious experience, it's all of those things.
Yeah. What
And you
about you?
just say, this is so beautiful.
Mhm.
It's been made for us and we can enjoy it no matter where our head is at another time. This is where our heart is, in the wonder of everything that's been created. And it's a great way to start the day.
Sounds like an amazing
Mhm.
way to start the day. What about you, Tisha? How do you
Mhm.
incorporate that childlike wonder? I mean, like you said, you got teenagers, so I'm sure that they have some of that childlike wonder. They're also teenagers, which means that they're probably, I think you said they were in their teen years, so they're teen years going on 55. Because I know that from my own nephews. So sometimes I'm going like, I remember when y'all were born and y'all were such nice little babies, and now y'all are sitting there towering over me and everything. And I'm going like, when did this happen? I know it happened during these years of y'all's birth to now and everything. But yeah, sometimes I'm a little bit stunned by how much bigger and how grown sounding they are and everything. So I'm sure you had that experience as well.
Mhm. It's funny, like, I feel like, I keep finding these shirts lately that just talk about adulting and how it's so overrated. Like, I just got a shirt for my husband that says, "Adulting not recommended," and it has, like, a half of a star, and I'm like, "Oh, I love that." It's just so right on, and so I agree. There's posts that I saw about it's not about us growing older together, it's about us growing younger together.
Okay.
And my husband and I, we really try and take a lot of time for us just to go out and explore and be those kids, those happy-go-lucky kids, like when we first met. So we'll always do date nights and so forth. But, having kids, I always get to kind of experience some of the things they're doing. Like my daughter is like, I want to go to Skateland with friends. And I think personally, it's such a great experience as a parent because you get to be the one taking the kids and listening in on the conversations and being heavily involved with them. And like, it's the whole thing of, well, I'm going to go skate with you. We're going to go do these things together. I had my niece over the summer and we went to Legoland out here. And it was so cool, just the two of us, to watch her face and see her doing all of the exploration. And just her face, though, she was just so excited about those small things. So for me, it's about like relishing in those small, simple pleasures. I was in California this weekend and I kept walking past. You've probably seen the bird of paradise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those plants that it looks just like the bird. And I'm like, I love it. I had to go back and I actually had to take pictures of it because I'm like, I love this, like small things, right? Like just like you, Leona, with your sunrise. Arizona has some of the most beautiful sunsets, and I just sit there in awe. I stop everything. I just watch.
I definitely agree with you because I was actually thinking about, because I think they've had it already a couple of times, but I want to say that coming up very shortly, there's going to be Brick Fest here in North Carolina and all along those lines, but it's actually going to be a Lego festival. And I'm thinking, like, I do not remember playing with Legos as a kid, but I might make it a point to go to that event. I want to say that it's in either December or something like that, but definitely I'm going like, hey, just watching people, because even before the pandemic, I remember going to some Comic Cons, including seeing some things, and I'm sitting there going like, wait a minute, I don't believe one that y'all are doing this, because one of the things that I'm involved in a lot of things, but one of them is a talent show, and it's a talent show to raise awareness around veterans issues. But we use the Apollo model as part of what we do. So we have our own brick, our own rotating Kiki Shepherds, our own house band, and a number of other things. And me, as well as the founder, do the majority of the MC, and I MC with all the contestants. He also does the big pitch and does the granting of the winners and all of that, along with myself, and all in that kind of way. But it's just interesting having that kind of space of that childlike wonder, even in using it for advocacy purposes. Because like I said, we're doing advocacy conversation around veterans rights, but we're doing it using the Apollo model and everything. So that's the way that I bring in the childlike wonder, because as I said, when I interview these contestants, I'm going like, what can I find out about their life that's interesting that the fans might get into? But like I said, we've been doing that, but he created it, Captain Newborn did, as a way to bring the veterans issues out there, because too often that's an issue that isn't touched on enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we got to do more of that. But definitely, I'm thinking about going to the Lego Festival. I did not make it to our state fair, because the state fair was actually just ended on yesterday. I have gone there with some of the advocacy groups and some anti-war groups and other things in the past, but I did not make it this year, and that might be. But I've gone in the past and definitely enjoyed it, and I've had friends that played. As a matter of fact, one of our sound men, the places I mentioned earlier, his band was actually playing on, I think, either day 3 or day 4, and all along that kind of line. So, and people out there enjoying their hot dogs and a number of other things doing those kind of festivals. So I wish that more people would do that. But in that same space, I was wondering your thoughts around this. One of the complaints I've heard is that, and y'all kind of alluded to it earlier, is that I was talking to the lady that actually, if you remember that song, you mentioned hip hop earlier, Rock, Skate, Roll. She actually used to live in New York at the time that song was being created and everything. That skate park is no longer in the part of New York. I think it was Brooklyn and all in that space. And I know that here, some of our skate parks are disappearing and some of our other lanes are disappearing. So do you think that we are doing enough to preserve these kind of activities for the kids and all in that kind of space? Because that's where I get frustrated, is when I hear things like that skate park. There was a iconic skate park there in New York. It was part of where they recorded Rock, Skate, Roll disappearing, and Wheels is disappearing here and everything. That sometimes I wonder if we're doing enough to give outlets to our kids. So I'll start with you, Tisha, because you're a mom and everything. Do you think there are enough outlets for the kids, or are we letting them depend too much on the devices? Because I mentioned my nephews definitely have the Oculus set, and I'm not knocking the Oculus set or even some of the other things that are out there, but I don't know that there's enough of what you just described that you went to with your, I think you said, niece and everything. So do you feel that we're protecting enough of our resources for our kids, particularly in the space of recreation and activities for them?
I really haven't seen a shortage of it here. I'm out in Gilbert, Arizona, which is like one of the top places to live for families. So we see a lot of even trampoline parks going up. Like when my daughter said Skateland, I'm like, geez, I went to Skateland back then. Like, I love that it's still around, and they've actually opened up more locations. And so I find that there really isn't a shortage of things that the kids can be doing, and it doesn't always have to be a costly activity. We have tons. I mean, just because of the weather that we have here, there's always festivals, there's always parks to go to, there's always something you can be doing outdoors. So I really encourage the kids, and being that we're a big soccer family, like we're always on a soccer field, every weekend. So I feel like we're always, encouraging that with the kids of get off your phone and go do these things. Pickleball, another big thing that's coming up, that has been, we see pickleball courts everywhere. So it's not hard for us to just grab a game and bring our stuff and go play. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that in other parts of the country, they're not doing away with those things, because it's important for kids to be able to have those recreational resources, to be able to get out and do some things outdoors. We need to encourage it. We do. Like, I think as parents, we need to advocate and say, hey, you're not going to be on your phone today. We're going outside. All right. We're going to go do some stuff outdoors. We're going to have picnics. Like when my kids are on fall break, we're always like, hey, where's the next picnic spot? Where are we going? Yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that. How is it in New Mexico? Because like I said, definitely.
There's lots of open space in New Mexico, and it's gorgeous. I'd like to add an activity to the picnics and the family gatherings, and that's a session of storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
So that people are not on their cell phones, they're talking to each other, and they're listening to each other, and they're talking about whatever the story is. So they can get into the story and know that people tell stories. It's not just computers that tell stories or movie theaters that tell stories. It's people who create the stories and tell them.
No, I'm
so
glad
that's another activity to add to the family gathering.
No, I agree with you, and I'm glad you said that, because that's something that I feel that we don't do enough of, and all in that space. Even here, I'm glad to be able to do these kind of interviews, and they're out there for as long as folks keep their records and keep them out there, and they're probably out there, for decades and centuries and all along those lines. But I do know that there was a time in our society when we would oftentimes listen to stories of our ancestors, stories of our elders. Now, elders is a better word than ancestors, but we would listen to their stories, like you said, sitting by a fireside. And I don't know that we do enough of that now. I know that there are some cultures that still do it very actively. I'm thinking about some of the African nations and some of the Latin American nations and all in that space, but I don't know as a society that we do enough of that. And I sometimes get frustrated, particularly when, some of these people have passed on and the family either haven't made those videos accessible or they haven't documented those stories. And then we lose that narrative because we haven't recorded them and all in that space. So that's something.
And the time you want to do it is when someone's in full possession of their memory.
Right.
You don't want to wait until they're 95 and failing. You want to talk to them when they're 50, 60, 70. And some people are sharp up until the end anyway, but you don't know. And so if you don't do that before, you lose it.
Yeah.
And you need the connection to the past to build a foundation for the future. There's no way to do that without having, again, the foundation is important.
Right.
I agree with both of you. And that's something that I don't know that we do enough of, is understanding that connection to the past as well. Because in order to have the future, what's that old saying? If you don't understand your past, you're doomed to repeat it, and all along those lines. And I think that there are some things that are even going on in our society now that we had to pay closer attention to the lessons learned. We wouldn't be in some of the hot mess that we're in now and all in that space, because I think the lessons were already there, but sometimes we ignored those lessons or chose not to pay any attention to them and all in that space. Because even to what you've been talking about, Leona, I remember I'll just say it this way. I was a big fan of TV, and still I'm a big fan to some degree of TV. And one of the TV shows that I used to love watching as a youngster was The Waltons. And part of that was they would literally have that whole, good night, John Boy, good night, Ella May, and all of that. But there was also that nature of the family being together and communicating around the dinner table. I was also a fan of Andy Griffith. partially because he's from North Carolina, but also partially because that's kind of the narrative that was going on in that story. And even if we want to go a little bit further into life, happy days and all in that space. But I don't know that we're encouraging our kids to be engaged in that as much as those TV shows advocated. And I'm not saying that there weren't some negative aspects of what was going on in the 50s, 60s, and definitely in the Depression when the Waltons were set. We do know that there were some hardships going, and there was some definitely racism and other things that were taking place. But that notion of the family unit, I think, was a very strong message that was put out there by a number of those shows. And I wish that we would pay closer attention to those kind of narratives. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts around that.
I wish we can go back to that too, truthfully. I feel like, again, I mean, I just said it even earlier that it's like, I think families are so divided with all of the activities and everything. And I mean, I can honestly say that I do make dinner a priority with the family. So we're all together and I'm making dinner. Like I am one of those people that has to cut my day off because I'm like, all right, kids need to eat because they need to digest and they need to get to soccer and hubby's coming home. So it's like this well-oiled machine of when things need to happen because it's important to me that we all sit down together, even though we're going to be together for 20, 30 minutes, then we go off and do our things. But it's so important to make sure. And I feel like, again, that's the role model thing. Like when the kids get older, they're going to see my family and I always ate dinner together. It was important to us to always be at the dinner table together because that was the only time we had. And it's sad because I don't think that because we've got DirecTV and we've got YouTube TV and Netflix and all these things, I don't think we have those wholesome shows really that are teaching these kids because these kids are watching YouTube. They're watching reality. And that's not reality. We're not seeing that as much anymore. So yeah, bring on Happy Days, bring on, the Andy Griffith Show, like back to those sets of days, like, I don't know.
At least that was an honest script.
But
I mean, now we have scripted reality shows and they're dishonest.
Integrity. It's against integrity.
Comes back to that integrity topic because, like I said, they are very much scripted and everything along those lines. I actually had a friend that was looking at possibly being on one of those. It was actually about single women in their 50s and all in that space. And when I heard some of the narrative, I'm going like, wait a minute. One, it sounds scripted, and one, it sounds like they're trying to create conflict because I think they wanted like some friends to be together and all in that space. So they wanted to be like a group of friends. They were, because they described it as a bachelorette show. And I'm going like, well, that already sounds like y'all have got some tension there because you're going to have the friends going against each other. And I think that they described it as they wanted to show how the friends were supporting each other. And I was like, that's not quite what it sounds like and everything. It sounds like the script.
I know. It's catty. It's all catty.
Yeah.
You can't do it. Drama. Too much drama. You don't need more drama.
Yeah, don't need more.
The idea is you create a dramatic situation.
Right.
But you can't do that unless you're creating it if it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so it's really not the truth. It's something somebody scripted.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Getting ready to wind down very shortly, and I've been having fun with this conversation. We could go on for hours on end because both of you are definitely very great communicators and all along those lines. But there is a term I hear used all the time on Clubhouse and in social media, and it's one that is part of your bio and all of that, Tisha. And I know I've been accused of being this word as well. In some ways, it can be a positive word, in other ways, it can be a not as positive word. But to you, what does it mean to be a connector? Because definitely I've heard people use the word connector and influencer. I sometimes, like I said, like to mentor people, and if I can bring a positive message, I'm all about that. But sometimes I think that those words are misused and everything. So to me, connecting is about connecting for positive good and all along those lines. But I don't know that everybody uses it in that sense. So to you, what does it mean to be labeled? Because I do see that on your webpage as being both a mentor, author, and we do know that you're an author, but also a connector as well. So what does that word mean to you?
First of all, Mark, I thought you were going to use the other word that I have in my LinkedIn profile, which is badass. So I was prepared to talk about badass.
Well, I was going to get to that one as well.
Yeah. But you're right. Like I do consider myself an ultimate connector. And I do feel like you just hit the nail on the head. It's about doing it for the greater good. It's not for what am I getting out of this? So if I introduce the two of you, what do I get? And you see a lot of people of the whole what's in it for me mentality. I look at it as, hey, I know this person. Have you not met this person? Because I know the two of you would do some incredible things together. And just, it's about spreading the good vibes. It's about spreading those good vibes, right? So I host my event coming up on Wednesday is called Social Connect. And I made it so much like you said, Leonie, it's like you have to advocate and you have to do things that perhaps aren't being done the way that you really want to see them done. So here in Arizona, we're inundated with networking events. And I go to these networking events and I'm like, yeah, it's just gross. Like it's just people shoving business cards, wanting you to do business today. And I remember being pregnant with my son and going to one, and I swear, I talk about this all the time in my purposeful networking talk, of feeling like I was a target because every insurance person, every person's trying to sell me a 529 plan, everybody that sees me as their next quota. And it was so sick. I'm like, how about getting to know me as a person first?
Yeah.
And so even at this event, I'm saying we're tossing out business cards. You're not here to pick up on people. You're not here to try and get business out of this event. This is really about going back to basics of conversation and storytelling. So every event that I host, I know it's so hard for people. We're so ingrained to be like, this is what I do. What do you do? You always ask that question. What do you do? What do you do? And instead, I really made it back to, hey, tell me something about you. So It's more conversational. So like, for instance, I've asked the questions like, what was your first job that you've had? And it was so interesting to me, the dynamic, because you see people who are writing, I was a dishwasher, when we're 16, we get those jobs at the restaurants. And it was so cool to see all the dishwashers kind of hanging out in one corner, getting to know each other, who have different lifestyles. They're not dishwashers anymore. But just the storytelling aspect, Leonie, of where did you work? What did you do? Do you remember those hours? Do you remember all the things you had to do to get to the dishes? Those types of fun things. So I look at it as, how do we encourage connection through conversation, through genuine connecting, versus the what's in it for me? I'm not going to connect you because it's no good to me.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, because as you were just saying that, I was thinking about one of my jobs, and they were two jobs that were stereotypical when you're in college and everything. And I will definitely mention them. I've mentioned them before, but as I recall, and I don't remember, I think I had them for literally like a week if I was lucky. But I want to say that as one of those summer jobs, or one of those jobs you get while you're in college in order to try to make some spending money. I want to say that I did that whole Kirby vacuum thing, and I just remember going to like a couple of people's houses. I was like, no, this is not for me, and everything, because I was not a salesperson. Still don't consider myself a salesperson. And I also think that one of the other jobs, if I remember correctly, was doing that whole encyclopedia thing, and that didn't last long either. I think both of those jobs might have lasted for about 3 or 4 days. I'm feeling like, no, this is not the answer.
Door-to-door sales, yeah. I was going to add one more thing to that I see this mistake people making. And it's, again, it goes back to the whole what's in it for me, but holding your network hostage.
Yep.
Like holding my connections. These are my people. They're not your people. They're my people. I'm like, they're not anybody's people.
It's not just holding them hostage, but I don't know if you've run across this, but one of the things that I get frustrated by is there are, it takes a while to build up the connections, and the connections are, in my mind, very genuine. I didn't build these connections, whether it's the ones that I've made on this network haphazardly, or just for any kind of like bad purpose and everything. But I do know that there have been a number of folks that just automatically want you to give your network away and everything. So I'm sure you run across that, Tisha, because I can't tell you how many times I've had people that have been like, you have access because of some of the places that I've mentioned on this show with y'all and everything, to such and such mailing list. You have access to such and such list. You have developed your own list and emails and everything. Why don't you just give me that list and the emails and everything? And I'm going like, I spent years developing these contacts and everything. Why should I just like give them to you? And a lot of times it's like, because you're my boy, or you're my girl, or whatever terms you want to use and everything. So you should just do it out of our friendship. And I'm going like, no, it doesn't quite work that way. So I'm sure that as a connection, you've probably run across people that have wanted you to kind of give away the shop, for lack of a better term.
I will always say, if there's someone in my network that you want to meet, then let me know, and I will make the warm intro. Because I do feel it's so much better for me being the, kind of the conduit between the two, versus, hey, Leonie, just reach out to Mark and tell him you know me. Like, you know,
Why
and you're
would
going to
I
be
do
like,
that?
okay. And that might work 50% of the time. Mark, you might reply and go, oh, yeah, okay, I know Tisha, you know, whatever. But I'm like, no. Let me know who you want to meet and I will connect you. But I am not going to take someone's private information and send it. You know, and the same thing, like I know at my event, I say there's no business cards because I don't want people abusing that right. And so at the end of the event, I have everybody who has gone through registration. I remove emails, phone numbers, but I do keep a list of who their LinkedIn profiles, their social media profiles. And I'm like, here's everybody in the room. Why? Because I know you didn't meet everybody in this room. There were 50, 60, 60, 70 people here. You might have met really 2 or 3 really great connections, which is what I try to encourage you to do. But if there are some people that you didn't get to meet, here's how you start following through. Here's how you say, hey, we had a common interest. We were both at Tish's event that night. I'd love to connect with you. We didn't get a chance to that night, but I'd love to, you know, connect with you on this platform or whatever.
Hey,
So I
Tisha,
give them the tools.
yeah, I agree with you on that. Just out of curiosity and everything, I mentioned asked this earlier and everything, and I know there's at least one letter missing, but the pronunciation is similar. And I do have family members that are part of the Native American Society, some that identify more with the Native American Society than they do with the African American, which is what me and my mom and brother identify with, and all along those lines. But there is a famous activist that is in the Native American space that has a similar name. I think it might be an extra L, and all along those lines. But I was just wondering if there was any relationship between you and Mr. Peltier, the Native American activist that is out there as well. So as I was hearing your conversation and knowing that he's in that space and has definitely been out there in some of the West Coast area, particularly in the Dakota, I was just wondering if there was any family connection that you were aware of.
I'm not aware. It's my husband's last name, French Canadian. So I don't know. Like when people ask me if I'm related to them, I'm like, it wouldn't be me.
It might be more on the
Always
husband
my
side.
answer. I'm like, maybe my husband's family, but no.
I was just curious, 'cause like I said, I do think there was a couple of letters that might be slightly different and everything, but it's very much a similar pronunciation, and definitely it's a strong native presence even in French Canada, because actually one of my cousins moved there and married a native young lady that's up there and everything, and he's actually got his own native clothing line and everything. So Red Eye Supply, you can check out my cousin Bill doing stuff in that space and everything. You had mentioned earlier about, and I was going to get to that, the badass comment, and I am a big fan of people reclaiming words, and definitely we have seen that in the women's lane where people have used that word that kind of is associated with witches and other kind of terms and reclaimed it for their own use. We definitely have seen that in the African American organizations with the words that have in it and everything. There's a famous rap band that definitely reclaimed it and everything. So I was just wondering, was your badass, you reclaiming a word that's going to sometimes have a negative connotations, or you just consider yourself badass in general? Because I know even here on the network that definitely, because she's made it into an acronym, and I forget what the acronym stands for, but that word that rhymes with which one of our founders has reclaimed that word, because she says that, yes, I'm that word and I'm not going to be unproud of it. And then she goes into what the acronym means for her and all along those lines. But I just wondering about this badass phrase.
Yeah, you know, so I do a lot of work around personal brand building for people, and I've always said that your network is probably the best place to ask of how they perceive you.
Right.
And that was actually a gal who told me that. Like she saw me speaking on a stage, she had been following me on some social media and finally met me, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you remind me of this authentic with a touch of badass because of the way you present yourself and the way you show up." And I just was like, "Oh my gosh, I love that." So I do feel I am that girl that can be empathetic, definitely kind, but can be a little bit edgy, definitely speak my piece. I don't hold back and I tell it like it is. I don't sugarcoat things. I feel like that does no good for you. So even when I work with clients, I am about giving them tough love, but showing them grace. And I feel like that's kind of where that badassery comes from. So it's more of a confidence thing, in my opinion. It's not meant to be a bad thing. It's meant to be like, you know what? You show up as you are. You don't back down. Like you fight for what's right and what you believe in. And to me, that's what that means.
That makes sense. Leona, if somebody had to describe you in one word, or maybe they have described you in one word when you've been doing your advocacy word and everything, what is the way that they would describe you? Maybe even your own family and other people have a description for you as well. So how would folks go about describing Leona and the advocacy work that you do?
Well, I think that Tisha just did a really good job of defining all the things that go into that. And I think it probably does apply to me. I'm sure the people on the other side of the court case would describe me that way too. No, she won't back down. No, she's not going to cave. No, I'm not.
Yeah, just even in the short time I've known you, Leonie, like I look at you as like a fighter. You definitely are that fighter. Like that's how I envision you. And I don't know you much from just this conversation, but
Yeah.
just in everything that you've said about not taking the money and making sure that your voice is heard and making real change happen. I mean, that's notable for sure. It's
Well, come
commendable.
help us do it. Be a force in the equation there.
Yeah, yeah, that's how change happens, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It doesn't happen with a bunch of words on a page. It happens with people.
It does. It does.
Change is definitely about people. As I said, we're getting ready to wind down and everything. One of the things I get everybody to do as we end this conversation, but like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I said, we went 2 hours and I could probably go another 2 hours, but I do have to get ready to go to that cultural center that I mentioned earlier and all along those lines. But I get everybody to share their background in terms of how they can be reached and if they are things that they haven't got to say that they would like to share. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I'm all about this crazy world we live in is definitely a crazy world. I'm about trying to spread messages of positivity and hope. So if there is a message of positivity and hope that you would like to share with our global audience, whether it's the radio show with Mark Lee, which is this show, or the online dinner party, which is the Wednesday show, I try to get all my guests to share their message of positivity and hope because I figure if we get enough of those messages, then we can change the world. So that's just kind of my own philosophy. And like I said, every little small step helps make it a better world. That's kind of my philosophy and everything in that space. So definitely, I'll start with you, Leona. If you can tell folks how you can be reached, and definitely any messages that you might not have got to that you would like to share, and also how you can be reached and messages of positivity.
Okay. You can reach me at my first name, Leonie, at dayspringresources.com. And that's real easy. It's right there on the screen, and you can find me there. I'm into changing things for the better. I'm into actively doing things, but considered before they're done so that you don't end up with all of these unexpected, unanticipated consequences that happen when people just want to change because they want to change. You need to know why, you need to know how, and then you need to go do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely going to get to Tisha. That was actually interesting because that was a conversation that Toby, who is a friend of mine and does a lot of work in esports, but he's also been on our show as a news commentator and everything else. But he would talk about what you just said because he was bringing up this notion of protests versus riots because he was saying that the ones like you even look at BLM, a lot of the people that caused the problem were the ones that saw opportunity. We're talking about opportunistic situations and they created riots, but they weren't the ones who were actually trying to create the message. And the message was really about whatever the change was. In that case, it was around police reform, but we have seen that before. And even when I was part of Occupy, I remember we knew who the Antifa members were. We just tried to keep an eye on them because we knew that they might be disruptive and all along those lines. So as organizers, we were aware of who the troublemakers might be, and you just tried to make sure that you kept an eye on them so that it didn't cause any of that trouble and all along those lines. So I think you have to be aware of that also. So definitely, I think that there is some messaging that goes out in some of our conversations also that we have to be aware of and be very conscious of and even cognizant of as well. So I'm sure you've run across that, Leona, and some of the things that you've been doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. Tisha, as we're wrapping up, if you can definitely tell how you can be reached and if you want to give the social media outlets that you are at, and both of you are welcome to come back. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. As I've said several times, and I hope that you will make return trips so we can continue these dialogues. Because like I told both of you, this is what it's all about. It's just candid conversation and us sharing our life lessons learned and things that we've been through. And hopefully it will help other people in their journeys and their causes also. So that's what it's all about. And that's what I see this as a opportunity to do with this particular network that I have now become part of with Pod TV and all in that kind of way. But definitely, if you'll share how you can be reached and also any message of positivity and hope that you would like to share as well.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Mark. So Tisha Marie Pelletier, and you can find me on my website at tishamarieNterprises.com. And there's places to contact me as well there. But I would say the platform that I'm always on is LinkedIn. So if you just type my name in, Tisha Marie Pelletier, you should be able to connect with me, find me there, mention that you saw it on Pod TV. And then here's my message. I would say create the life that you want and go do it. That's it. And I work with a lot of solopreneurs, especially who I feel are in those stuck stages where they can't see the forest for the trees. They can't yet envision it. And that's what I love to do, is be able to get them to that vision, and figure out the plan. Because a lot of times we're so close to our own goals and dreams that we don't see what's possible. And so that's what I love to be able to do for them. And I work with clients all over the world. So yeah. Good stuff.
That sounds great, and definitely look forward to it. We actually usually will close out with Kendu Spice, which is a friend of mine's health food thing, and I may still play that toward the end, and well, at the end. But right now, because of the conversation that we've had, and I actually played it at the end of our Latin show that we do with several Latin women called Que Pasa Mujer and everything. But with this conversation we've been having, and all along those lines, I've got a PSA that ironically involves LinkedIn and all about that, but it is about women in the tech field and all along those lines. So I think that is one of the PSAs that I'll play at the end, might play one or two others as well. But definitely, this has been a great conversation. And like I said before, I hope that both of you will make a return trip in the not too distant future and all along those lines. And I hope that you had as much fun with the conversation as I did, and definitely tried to keep it engaging and interesting. And I think that we did a good job in that space. But I hope to see both of you on a return trip in the near future.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
No problem.
My advice to women seeking leadership roles in technology is to be confident.
I would recommend to speak up.
I think it's really important as you pursue a role in technology to have unshakable optimism.
I can't stress enough the value of mentorship.
When I think about any large career move, I ground it in 3 pillars, and that is purpose, potential, and people.
Use your voice, raise your hand, and be confident in your own ability.
Just speak up. Say what you feel, say what you think. Don't be intimidated by men around the table or other people more senior than you.
Enjoy solving problems. Each and every single day, depending who you're working with, you need to be able to enjoy that process.
Find females who will support you and share their experience as to how they navigated the tech industry and how they're currently navigating the tech industry. Your voice matters, your opinion matters, and you're there for a reason, so use that.
But when you have a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of why, not only does it help you go through your crucible moments, it actually inspires your team to rally around you.
Be an FIO person, which just means figure it out. You may not know, but find a way and get it done.
Women tend to be less likely to apply for promotions, to speak up in meetings, or apply for new roles if they don't feel like they have all of the skills required to be successful. The fact of the matter is, seldom does anyone, so why could that opportunity be yours?
I am so glad you ladies are here. You each have your own rooms.
Thank you.
Get settled in. I'll call you for dinner. Adopting teen sisters, it's a lot. Girls, you're gonna be late. You want breakfast?
No thanks, we're good.
They're always in their own world.
What'd you get, baby?
Twice the work. Twice the surprises.
Just try it.
But if you think of it that way, they're also twice as fulfilling.
I think you should ask her yourself.
Is it okay to call you Mom?
Of course you can.
30 minutes over a cup of coffee. A laugh, a smile, a message. Thumbs up emojis, clapping emojis, confetti emojis. Loaded nachos at halftime. It takes 1 try, 2 tries, 3 tries, and a girl, you got this. It takes a queen to H5 at the park. Best 2 out of 3. A spin dash for the win. A Sunday morning gift. A bright splash of color. This is how you make an impact on a kid's life. It may sound small, but it's all they need. A word of encouragement. Someone to talk to, advice. And the time it takes to enjoy a slice or two, you can make a difference. So go ahead, share a few hours a month. Share your skills, share a song, share your thoughts, share a moment. Share a dance and share it with the world. Because yeah, mentorship sounds huge, but the truth is, it takes little to be big.
Women's leadership matters to me because we are an integral part of our union in advancing and protecting the rights of workers. We know that navigating leadership can be very difficult for women with unique lived experiences and who come from various communities. As a racialized woman leader, making space for Indigenous, Black, and racialized women members is crucial to creating a union that is inclusive. I'm committed to making sure all voices are heard, including those that have been historically overlooked. We all have a role to play in inspiring and providing opportunities for women to engage in our union and to improve the lives of workers and their communities.